Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar this afternoon on DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, creating a cohesive company culture. We are so glad that you joined us today. I know this is a topic that is just on the forefront of all of our minds. It has been for many years, but it seems that the landscape around this conversation continues to change and evolve. And it is something that as workplace leaders, as employees, as supervisors, decision makers, we are thinking about all the time, thinking about how to make this a more effective system, how to improve the culture in our workplaces, and really kind of navigating through what the practical tips are for addressing this topic. And so I'm thrilled that you're here with us today as we spend the next half an hour looking at this. If you are new to this webinar series, we're so glad you joined us. My name is Ashley Virtue, and I am the Director of External Relations for the National Conflict Resolution Center. We started putting on this webinar series about a year ago, and the focus of it is really to help workplace leaders navigate through some of today's most challenging issues in the workplace, because we recognize that we are dealing with things that perhaps have not historically been in the workplace, or at least not the way they are today. And a lot of that is because our culture, our society is a lot more divided than it has been in previous years. And so we're having to tackle topics that, perhaps didn't show up in a workplace before and now do, or if they did, they didn't look as divided or polarized as they might right now. And so the National Conflict Resolution Center, we spend a lot of time in this space. We do a lot of training in the areas of culture and communication and conflict resolution. And so we thought it would be really helpful to be able to provide these webinars once every couple of months to be able to, look at some of these topics. And so today I am delighted to be joined by Alicia Moore. Alicia is someone who I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the last few months. She is currently at Columbia Sportswear Company as a program manager in DE&I. Prior to that, though, Alicia's worked in this space for over 13 years, really across the country in different large national corporations. And I know has seen how this has played out. This topic has played out both over time and across a variety of states and a variety of company cultures, and now comes to us with her wealth of experience to look really at this topic of how we can create a cohesive company culture around equity and inclusion in the workplace. And so, Alicia, thank you so much for joining us today. And I would love to hand it over to you for a few minutes just to get a bit of an overview of kind of where we are right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ashley, for that great introduction. From my vantage point and having lived in multiple states over the past 3 years, and thank you for that intro of giving the time length that I've been working in DE&I. And that's important because, as I'll share, I like to think of myself as from the before time. And the before time is the summer of 2020. And so that's where I will speak to the changes that we've seen within DE&I. And one of the most significant changes that I think we've seen is the coupling of DE&I with social justice issues. And, I think this is significant, and it has created some backlash within some companies. It has caused other companies to refocus or recalibrate their efforts around DE&I. I think what's interesting about that is when we think about an asset of DE&I, which is our employee networks or ERGs, whatever you call them at your companies, back in the 70s when these ERGs began, they were started because Xerox was the first ERG to ever launch. And it was created around the fact of coming out of the civil rights movement. And there were many African-American employees who were still dealing with issues of equality and equity in their workplaces. And so it really started there. So we fast forward now to 2020, and now we have this coupling again. And so I think it's been a really interesting thing to watch, both as a DEI practitioner and also as someone who, really is very interested in our social issues and how they affect our workplaces.
So, oh, go ahead. Were you going to add something else?
No, that was it. Sorry about that.
I'll launch into some of our questions. And for our audience members, we have, as you know, if you've joined us before, we pack a lot into about 30 minutes. And so Alicia and I will be having a bit of a conversation, but if you have a burning question or something that you really want to know, we will do our best to try to get to that. Can't promise it. We will try. So do feel free also to engage with one another in the chat, as well as using the Q&A function. We'll do what we can to get to them. And if we can't, we always can follow up with you. So I wanted to know a little bit about, one of the reasons we even decided to have this conversation is because we've seen recent reports that show us that DE&I efforts, unfortunately, are starting to show this trend of waning a bit in the country. We saw this massive increase in efforts in 2020, as you mentioned, many companies stepping forward with, whether it was statements, new policies, hiring DE&I directors for the first time. And some of that was very real. Some of it was maybe partially a PR move. But unfortunately now, we're 3 years later, we're starting to see some of that decrease. And so what trends are you seeing and why do you think that that's starting to happen?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think it's important to note, I'm hopeful and I don't want to continue to see this trajectory of DEI efforts waning, because I actually think they were making some headwinds and they were making, companies more, they were helping to build great teams. They were forcing innovation. And so I think there were some really great efforts. I think what has happened though, is that again, that coupling of social justice issues, right, with DE&I put companies in a unique space that they haven't been before. So for a lot of companies whom for DEI was new and they didn't have a foundation laid or any alignment to their core values or their missions, unfortunately, these are the companies that you're seeing that are really struggling with their DEI efforts. I would also say that we've had some shifts in our political climate. Empathy, unfortunately, has been politicized. And so any consciousness around the experiences of other people in our community, then you're all of a sudden woke. And I think that it's unfortunate that a word that simply means aware has turned into this hell and media storm of what people are calling wokeness. I also think that there was a lack of sustained commitment. Just because you issue a statement around DEI doesn't mean that your company has a commitment to DEI, both in practice and not just in theory. I also think that we've had a limited awareness and understanding of DEI, because even though it's gained a lot of significant attention over recent years, there's still a lack of awareness or understanding the importance and its benefits. We have multiple studies out from McKinsey and Garnett and Cook and Ross. There's so many studies that really highlight the benefits, the innovation that happens with diverse teams. But there are still a lot of people within our workplaces that don't fully comprehend the systemic barriers and inequalities that have existed for years. And to try and change those systems and those environments really takes a company that has an appetite for that. And then finally, I would say, we are in a bit of an economic downturn. And so resource constraints around DE&I may be an issue as well. And I say this in air quotes, both real and imagined, because I think that if something is important to you, you will find the dollars to pay for it in your workplaces.
So, as a workplace leader, kind of looking at this landscape and looking at the challenges that there are, and maybe some very well-intentioned workplaces set out on these courses and then realize they had more to overcome than they realized.
Mhm.
What do you think is necessary to keep going down this path, to overcome some of those hurdles so that you can
Mhm.
put the prioritization and the focus on this?
I think what's really important is it has to start at the top. I think it is unfair to ask, people from underrepresented communities to lead these efforts in their workplaces. I mean, the emotional collateral that goes with that is significant, along with people doing their day jobs as well. But having a strong sponsorship coalition of leaders who believe in this work, who will sponsor it and champion it, is very important. It's crucial. And there are simple things that go along with that: showing up to employee network events, you know, being a speaker at events, really positioning DEI as a value and not as a constraint. I mean, I think these are all ways that you can do that. And I'm fortunate enough to be at a company that centers DE&I, because we've had a history of inclusion that really began with our founder, who was a woman, Gerd Boyle. And so having that foundation and having a set of core values and DEI pillars that guide our work makes it very easy to continue to advance and grow our DEI efforts at Columbia.
Yeah, I've always been so, fascinated and inspired by the fact that Columbia Sportswear really is founded in this concept of inclusion, because Gert Boyle was a female, founding a sportswear company at a time where that was, it was probably less heard of even to have female business leaders, much less in kind of the sports arena and field. How do you feel? I know so many companies right now are struggling, especially multi-state companies are struggling with how to have a cohesive policy or culture around inclusion at their company when they have employees in a state like California that actually has quite strict laws around the types of training you need to have and the types of inclusive and equity training you need to have, versus a state like Florida, who are passing acts that are kind of the anti-woke movement that's happening there, where it's much harder to have that type of training. So as a multi-state company, I mean, how do you see kind of your origins being a company that believed in inclusion in the beginning, coming up against or working with the state of our country now?
Yeah, so I just want to add that being multi-state, Columbia has also grown into a global and a very iconic brand over the last 80 years. We have a family of brands, Sorel, Prana, and Mountain Hardware, and we have over 10,000 employees in over 100 companies. So we are consumer focused, and we lead with the belief that the outdoors are for everyone. And we have core values, and we've developed DEI pillars that guide our work. And those DEI pillars are really around listening and learning, diversifying talent, creating and sponsoring opportunities, and being a force for good. And this is what helps to ground us when we are in these states where we do have these fluctuations in social realities, right? Is we have to stick hard to our core values and really focus on our employees and our consumers. And I think if you can do that, you can foster a genuine commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion that really goes beyond compliance requirements. You have to have those strategies and actions defined. And it's important because that helps you to continue to grow that commitment and to grow that maturity of your DE&I efforts.
So what I'm hearing, and I think, this is just so encouraging, is that it starts, one, with leadership at a company.
Absolutely.
And two, it starts with your values, so that everyone has an understanding coming in from the first day you're hired, that this is about more than just an effort or a policy. This is just about our values as a company.
Exactly. I mean, from the beginning to the end, at Columbia Sportswear, the day that you show up for your new employee orientation, we spend a significant amount of time talking about our core values, talking about our founder, talking about the issues that are important to us, and really how we guide our work. We're a very agile environment. And so we're constantly iterating on things, being a outdoor, sports focused company. We're able to really look at our consumers and really rise to the occasion of the types of products that they need to continue to ensure that the outdoors is for everyone, because we certainly recognize that that has not always been the case for certain members of our community. And so having those DEI pillars, having our core values is the cement that helps us to continue to grow our DE&I efforts.
I love the outdoors is for everyone. It's just taking a fantastic company with legitimately wonderful products and then creating that brand where it's accessible to all is so wonderful. What other tips do you think you have that are just practical tips for, a workplace leader thinking about ways to build this culture?
Absolutely. So as I said, I can't say it enough. Build your leadership coalition. You're going to need that support. And I think having senior leaders that are genuinely committed to DEI, both in practice and theory, really helps to articulate the importance of the DEI. It helps you to set clear goals, and they lead by example in their actions and decision making. I would also suggest the development of inclusive policies and practices. So establishing policies that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion at all levels. And this can include, hiring promotion practices, looking at your pay structures and comp for pay equity issues or gaps. And something that is going to become more important as more of us are coming back to the workplace is looking at flexible work arrangements. Are we creating a culture that continues to value the diverse perspectives, thoughts, and experience of all our employees? I think also in your talent acquisition, we all know that there's a real war on talent right now. And so it's important to actively seek out diverse talent, expand your recruitment efforts to underrepresented communities, and your employee networks and your ERGs are an excellent tool to use. You can do this at career fairs, events, also consider maybe initiating blind hiring practices. This is something that, I've seen done at other companies where you only see the person's skills. You don't see their name, you don't see where they live. This is a way that you can mitigate bias during the selection process. So, okay. I caught that question. Yeah, so that's a way that you can also mitigate bias. And I think even though there are mixed reviews around training and education, I think it's important to provide DEI training and education programs for all employees, and especially people managers. These employees should help understand unconscious bias. We need to continue to foster empathy, inclusive communication, and even within that, understanding that we all communicate differently. And again, I'm going to continue to plug our employee resource groups. We have an amazing group of employee networks at Columbia Sportswear Company. We have 7. And they have done so much work. I can't brag on them enough, but they have provided a safe space for employees to connect. They share experiences, they provide support, they inform on our products. It's just really important to stand these groups up, these employee groups up within our organization to continue to be a resource for DEI. And then finally, mentorship programs. I think these can be both formal and informal, where you can have kind of a reverse mentoring program situation that can help happen with the leader. They get to learn from you, you get to learn from them. And this also helps to give underrepresented employees a connection to senior leaders who can provide them with guidance and support and advocacy for the career advancement, because they don't always get that face time. So I think if you can employ some of these tips, I think that you can really demonstrate a genuine commitment that really goes beyond compliance.
How do you think metrics play into this? How do you measure success, do you think, in this area?
Yeah, and another great question. I also think KPIs are very fluid in the DEI space. And I think that we've gotten in Western culture, right? We're very used to using numbers to qualify things. I think the old cliche, what gets measured gets done. But if you have a representation of people, that's only one piece of the story. And so I would encourage, beyond just using representation numbers, which are just, you're just counting employees, tell your stories better. You know, what are the things that you're measuring and why? Because if you're just showing up with representation numbers, in my opinion, I think they're kind of empty, because it only tells one side of the story. So it's important to paint the issue of how far the company has come and the things that they've grown. Now, I will say this, places where I think metrics are important are in your supplier diversity metrics. It's important to show who are you doing business with. I mean, that's another way that a company can demonstrate its commitment to DE&I. And also, how is the company engaging with the community? You know, with our ERGs, you know, all of them are connected to a nonprofit, and that's a nonprofit that they do work with annually. And we do give a donation to these nonprofits as well. But it also does is it puts you in the community. And sometimes when you're in communities that are not your own, there's an immersion process and empathy gets built. And finally, I would say that in terms of KPIs and metrics, we have to remember that DEI is continuous improvement. It is probably one of the most fluid spaces, you know, in our work functions. It's an ongoing journey rather than a one-time initiative. And I feel as though oftentimes we want to rush DEI efforts. We want to show KPIs quickly, and you're dealing with individuals. And so everyone is not starting at the same place when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's important to regularly assess, what is your impact? How are you making a difference? Are you gathering feedback from employees? And are you gathering impact from your consumers? I know that we do. And as you're gathering all of that information, you may have to adapt or shift your strategies, you know, to those evolving needs and challenges.
And I imagine that it's such a great opportunity for employee engagement to ask questions around things like supplier diversity and community engagement and ways to be involved, and just getting employees' input in those areas as well.
Absolutely. And I think those are the areas where employee resource groups and networks really flourish the best. I mean, you have a group of employees who are committed to this work, and we can leverage their thoughts. They buy our products as well. So always incorporating that into your strategies as thinking about it as continuous learning and continuous improvement.
That flows so well into kind of this next concept, which is really all about creating belonging in the workplace. And I think, you know, Alicia and I have talked about this before, but there's such a synergy between having a cohesive culture around DE&I principles and also this concept of how we create belonging in the workplace, how we involve and include everyone in this conversation. And I think as workplace leaders today, and this is something that we talk a lot about at the National Conflict Resolution Center and in some of our various trainings, you know, we have kind of this opportunity, this unique opportunity right now to create belonging and to engage with employees, because employees are ready for that. They're feeling a sense of ownership in their jobs in ways that perhaps they haven't before. And so there's this investment in, you know, what we stand for and who we are and what those values are that we believe in. And so as workplace leaders, I think we also have to be very cautious and aware that we're always creating space, that we're always, you know, kind of creating an environment where people can bring different ideas to the table and can have that sense of being different from one another, yet still working together as a cohesive group going towards the same goal. And so I love this concept of creating belonging and really how doing that fosters an enthusiasm from people to all be moving in this same direction. You've covered some of these, but we think a lot about how things are so politically charged right now. And you mentioned that, even empathy has become politicized and how challenging that can be. And so some of the ways, just to add to some of what you said, that we've seen that we can really help create this sense of belonging in the workplace is to build shared identities around apolitical interests like corporate volunteering. And you touched on that, involving employees in some of that decision making, encouraging opportunities for employees to engage outside of work, hosting discussions, surveys, formats that encourage open communication and feedback from employees. I know this can be scary to do. I know this is something that often feels like a very vulnerable task for workplaces, but if you are a workplace leader who has done it, I'm sure you would say hands down, it was incredibly valuable. Even if there was a little bit of, of turmoil that came from it, or, exposure to some new ideas, it does really help create awareness and change. It's such a healthy and important thing for workplaces to be able to do. Focusing on those common goals, as Alicia has mentioned, the shared values that you have as a company. Absolutely ensuring that all team members feel respected and valued. Again, remembering that we're supposed to come with differing ideas and perspectives on things, as long as we can do so respectfully, with shared respect for one another and creating safe space for one another. That is what allows for that to exist. And if we can't do it with respect, then we can't have that safe space for that creativity to exist. And then really creating safe and highly structured dialogue opportunities to again have those moments. So this is so, we all know that this is so important, maybe the most important thing that your company can focus on in the coming year, because our workplaces are only going to become more diverse. Our workplaces are only going to, in our country, quite honestly, is only going to become more polarized. We have an election year coming up. We have a lot on the table, and all of that does find its way into the workplace. And so now is our time to prepare, to be ready for that, and to create these structures so that employees have a very clear sense of where you stand as a company and where they stand as employees. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
No, I was thinking about something that you said about creating belonging, and I want to leave everyone, because I know we're almost at time, but I want to leave everyone with a thought. And it's something that I use in my signature block all the time. And it's helpful because I'm not a fan of long definitions, but diversity is a fact, right? Equity is a choice, inclusion is a behavior, and your outcome is belonging. And so I think it's really important to it's a simple thing, but I lead with that all the time when we think about our workplaces.
I love that. What a perfect summation of the conversation that we've had, and the goals that we should have really for belonging. If this is something that you're interested in as a workplace leader and knowing more about it, I really encourage you to take a look at the Culture, Communication, and Conflict Certificate Program that NCRC offers. There's so many great programs out there. This is one of them. But we spend a lot of time talking about these concepts, as well as so many other issues that workplace leaders are navigating. Alicia, I know you had a little bit of an opportunity to go through this program. What were your kind of thoughts about it and how it connects to today's conversation?
Yeah, I would totally encourage everyone, if you have the opportunity, to really take advantage of the certificate courses at NCRC. Myself and another colleague attended earlier this year. I think it's very timely. I think I can share, Ashley, that this conversation actually came out of that certificate program, and you've got a great cross-section of industry and individuals and workplaces. So I would highly recommend and encourage participation in the certificate course.
Well, you were such a wonderful, and you get to meet people like Alicia in the course. I think that's one of the best parts about it, is that there are so many people who come into the course with brilliant ideas, and we really learn from one another as well, which is so fantastic. So remember, as always, I know we're wrapping up, that we, the National Conflict Resolution Center, we are here as a resource for you, whether you take a full certificate course, or even if you are just simply following us on social media. We have literally hundreds of free resources and videos and articles available on social media, and those are updated all the time. So make sure you're following at a minimum so that you have access to those free resources, and make sure you go out and buy something from Columbia, because it's the best clothing and sportswear that I know of. I love it. And you're supporting a wonderful company. So Alicia, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a powerful and important conversation. I think we could probably talk about it for hours. And I really look forward to continuing the conversation. Maybe we can pick it back up in a few months and see where we're all at.
Absolutely. And thank you, everyone. I know there's some questions in the chat, so we'll try to work through and get some answers back to those. I realize that this was kind of a 30-minute program, so I know there are lots of questions, and to Ashley's point, we could keep this conversation going for hours, really, given the content and how timely this is in our workplaces. But it's been a great time to spend with you all today, and let's keep the conversation going. And remember, the outdoors is for everyone. Have a great week.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.